The situation has changed for the probing forces of Ukrainian counter-offensive. Russians have moved in reserve to the most successful Ukrainian axis, Velika Novoselka or Zaporozhye axis. In this video we'll look what are the chances of penetrating through the newly bolstered Russian defensive lines. But before, in Kremina, on the northern front, it went kaboom. It's right here next to the front line and it went kaboom big time. I'll tell you the story. Russian sources indicate that assembled Russian troops were targeted on 14th of June by Ukrainian HIMARS. St. HIMARS visited the Russian gathering. Casualties estimated as 100 KIAs and 100 wounded in action. We're talking about 200 troops, and there were more. The rest of them fled. Why did the troops assemble there at all? Well, because they were reportedly waiting near the front for a speech from a commander for hours. This commander was called General Akhmetov, and he was eliminated during this kabooming. He had all of his troops gathered together into one place. Why does he do it? I mean, we know if a lot of Russian troops are together in one place, they start to smoke on mass scale, and careless smoking, you know what happens with it. Of course, he didn't show up for hours. They stood there, 200 plus men bunched together in one place, smoking carelessly, and the general didn't come. You know who came? St. HIMARS paid a visit and kaboom. This is what the dude looks like. He's now carelessly smoking in underworld. This is a very embarrassing loss for the Russians. It goes as high up as Putin himself commented on it. Careless smoking is a problem in the Russian army. But that is not the only place it went kaboom on a mass scale. This here is Primorsk. As you can see, this Melitopol, Tokmak, Rehi, that's the Zaporozhye front. So it's well down by the Azov Sea, occupied Russian Primorsk. It was a recreation center here, this building, which was turned into a Russian military base. Actually, Chechen forces military base. Kadyrov has sent out a lot more Kadyrovites to fight since the Wagnerites left. So Chechens made this pretty building here their base of actions. It's right here by the sea, Sonyachna, and the military base actually has a pool. Well, it's a recreation center, so it has a pool. It's a sunny by the sea place, so the Chechens were really making TikTok videos and sunbathing there until kaboom! It was struck with Storm Shadow, possibly because it's too far away for HIMARS and the bangs were too big for something else. Storm Shadow struck the Kadyrovites, and it is rumored that Adam Telikhanov, right-hand man of Kadyrov and the leader of the Chechen army group in Ukraine, got eliminated. KIA. Well, this is just a rumor, but it is spreading like wildfire. I mean, this dude, I've seen his face in many TikTok videos, running around with his Kalashnikov, pretending like he's leading some troops or doing something. In reality, we all know that it was, you know, by the seaside where there's no threat. Well, now we know there is a threat in the name of Storm Shadow, but I mean, they're nowhere close to the front line. They were at the very rear of as rear as possible. You cannot go any more rear because it's the sea. He is a member of the Russian State Duma and head of the Chechen branch of the Rosgvardia. Rosgvardia is like a military police unit. Well, it's not really military police, but they do the tasks, and they also do the executions of people who are traitors by their eyes, or Russian soldiers who retreat without orders. We have seen drone footage of Rosgvardia units actually shooting their own. He's the head of those Kadyrovites, fulfilling those military police duties. The recent news actually is that he is not dead. He's not eliminated, he got wounded, but he's alive. But it really damaged the Kadyrovite image. Again, they make him TikTok videos by the sea, enjoying the sun bath, and boom, got hit by Storm Shadow. Here, my friends, you see the Russian losses of the past 24 hours. 580 KIAs. Because we'll go later in this video into the reasons why is there a tactical pause going on the Zaporozhye front. Ukraine is not actively advancing or pushing with their probing forces, recon forces, and immediately it shows in the numbers. Russians have lost 12 tanks and 14 armored personnel vehicles, 10 artillery systems, 5 of which we see in this video also. They were all in one place. 155mm Russian self-propelled howitzers were destroyed with one Ukrainian artillery strike, so a very effective strike. And one helicopter was shot down also. Also, we'll talk later in this video about the helicopters. Russians have renewed their tactics in the Zaporozhye fronts with the Ka-52 alligators. It's a big problem for the Ukrainians, so I'm glad to see they shot one down. 9 UAVs, 3 cruise missiles, 24 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 3 special equipment. These are moderate losses, they're not small but they're not big. These losses indicate a pause in active offensive operations. Now we go straight to the battle map, and things have changed a little bit in the Zaporozhye front. Last time I checked, Staromayorsk and Ruzzians were in the grey area, meaning that Russians have been pushed out by Ukrainian artillery, but Ukrainians haven't advanced yet. By today morning, 9 a.m. when I was checking, Russians have reoccupied those 2 settlements. So they're again in the red zone, as we can see right here. During my last update, the biggest news was that Russians were actively striking Makarivka, trying to take it with a counterattack, but Ukrainians defended successfully. But yes, the Russians took these 2 settlements of Staromayorsk and Ruzzians. If we go a few clicks to the right, there's a settlement of Novodonetsk, which is part of the same axis, of course. The biggest change here is that this settlement was yesterday under Russian control. Now it's in the grey area. No, Ukrainians have not conducted an offensive operation here, but they pushed the Russians out with their artillery. There is heavy Ukrainian artillery being used in this axis, so sometimes artillery is enough to push the Russians out. Tomorrow we'll see if Ukrainians use the artillery momentum and occupy this settlement. In this video you can see how Ukrainian MRAPs are advancing in the Velika Novosilka axis, screened by infantry. Later in this video there is shots fired and the infantry connects to Russian infantry, and I was glad to see in this video how they reacted. Immediately the MRAPs sped up, and immediately the infantry got down, found cover and started shooting back. Didn't see any panic. All I saw was good training and controlled actions. But the biggest change that has been happening in this most successful Ukrainian counteroffensive axis is that now Russians, seeing that they lost 5 settlements already to the Ukrainian liberation, have brought their Dnipro and Kherson front units to bolster up this Velika Novosilka axis. Of course, they haven't brought everything, but they have brought the excess units that they don't need here anymore due to the flooding of the Novogahevka Dam and the area. We're talking about thousands of troops and hundreds of armored vehicles now arriving yesterday and today, starting to arrive in this axis, bolstering this front line, making it much more difficult for Ukrainians to penetrate through. The numbers on both sides have started to equalize now. 5 days ago, Ukraine had the numbers here. As we know, according to the NATO standards, an attacker should have 3-to-1 advantage in manpower and equipment. Well, by today, this number is equal, and in 2-3 days, Russians will even have a bigger force here than the Ukrainians, if the Ukrainians don't move their reserves here, which they haven't. That again shows what I was telling in the last video, that this success by the Ukrainian probing force here doesn't indicate that the main force of the Ukrainian reserve should be striking here. The goal of this probing force was to tie in the Russian reserves and see where they would be headed. Now they know that the Kherson reserves have been heading here. That means Ukraine is free to move their main force somewhere else where the Russian reserves are not. Another reason for the tactical pause is because Neskuchnes, Starozheve, Blagodatne, Makarivka were liberated, but these were all Russian defensive lines filled with mines. All of these fields are mined. Even though Ukraine liberated these settlements, these mines still need to be cleared, because Ukrainian rear units will be moving through those fields, and if they're mined, there will be casualties in the Ukrainian rear. So clearing those fields takes a lot of time. Luckily it won't be done under fire, but still, the personnel clearing those mines is needed in the front lines, but they cannot go there if they have to clear the rear. Another news is that Kupiansk in the northern front, as you can see right here, reserves from here have started to move to the southern front, because Russia seems to get the idea that Ukraine wants to strike from the southern front. It seems like it. They're moving reserves from Kherson and from Kupiansk. That would make it much more difficult for Ukraine to attack from the south, but does it make it any easier for Ukraine to attack from the north now, while this is weaker? Well, actually no, because the northern front, the entire northern area of Luhansk, northern Luhansk, is heavily forested. Secondly, the railways are intact and closer to Russia. The entire front is closer to Russia, meaning the logistics is more effective. And thirdly, Ukraine has not been striking the logistics of northern Luhansk like they have been doing with the southern front, destroying the rear logistics for months now. So striking in the north, while some diversionary operations can happen here. I don't see the main force attacking in the Luhansk area. Perhaps Donetsk, and mostly in the south. There are reports in the Ukrainian Telegram channels that Russians have been moving their anti-ship missiles near the Russian border in the Kharkiv area, near the Belgorod area, and near the northern Lugansk area. Why? There's no ships there. Well, because S-300s are stationed here for a very long time to bombard Kharkiv. Yes, S-300 anti-air missiles are used to bombard Kharkiv almost weekly. They can attack ground targets and they're very hard to shoot down. Now, I think why the Russians move their anti-ship missiles here is to do the same, because Ukraine doesn't have any meaningful navy that Russia should use these anti-ship missiles against. So they're, I guess, going to use them for terror bombing of Kharkiv, Poltava and other bigger Ukrainian cities in the area. These missiles have a range of 150 kilometers and they have a big explosive. And Russia has a lot of those missiles because they haven't used almost any of them because Ukraine doesn't have a navy. Now we go back to the Velika Novosilka axis, and there's a slight change also in those fields, forest belts as they call it. This change here, as you can see, where I'm with my cursor east from Levadna, Ukrainians have liberated some positions and pushed Russians out of those forest belts right here. 2 days ago, these were occupied by the Russians. As you can see from this video, Ukrainians are capturing trophies like in the Kharkiv offensive, but the scale is not even comparable. In the Kharkiv offensive, they went in with less armored vehicles than they came out with. We're talking about 300 plus captured intact Russian armored vehicles. Well, now we're mostly talking about a tank, an armored personnel carrier. Yesterday I saw a Russian self-propelled howitzer, one by one, slowly. If they capture one, it's good. And here we see small arms. Why is everybody thinking, and why is the Russia thinking, that the main Ukrainian thrust will come from Velika Novosilka, Zaporozhye axis? Because, well, before it started, Russians reported the heavy Ukrainian bombardment started. With what? HIMARS. HIMARS is usually not used by Ukrainians on the front line. It's used to strike the Russian rear logistics and high-value targets. Well, before the Velika Novosilka offensive, HIMARS was used to strike down individual machine gun nests, individual foxholes or strong points. Now this is like using a big hammer to do a very precise work. But they did it because Ukrainians needed this guaranteed result of destroyed machine gun nests before sending on their convoys. And that was enough to make the Russians think that the main thrust will come here and to send all of their meaningful resources to the Velika Novosilka axis. Unfortunately, what has happened, we have seen destroyed Ukrainian tank columns, armored personnel vehicle columns. Russians have learned from Ukrainians. We have seen recently, during this new Ukrainian counteroffensive, we have seen mobile, small Russian anti-tank crews. They're using ATVs, the vehicles you use in the forest that can traverse almost anything and they're really fast and agile. 2 to 3 of these ATVs, perhaps 6 men. What you can see on this photo is a Kornet, Russian wire-guided anti-tank missile. Now it's old school, it's wire-guided, but the range is 4+ kilometers and it's very precise if you're good at aiming. And unfortunately, this weapon is very good at knocking out any kind of armor. It could even knock out Abrams tank, unfortunately. And since Ukrainians have been using this tactic of fast, small, agile anti-tank crews for a very long time, Russians adapted it and are using it to a great effect, unfortunately. This is why we see also destroyed Leopards on this counteroffensive. Another big problem Ukrainians encountered with the Zaporozhye axis is this Ka-52 attack helicopter Alligator, Russia's newest attack helicopter. This helicopter has missiles that are laser guided and they have the range of 10 kilometers. That means a frontline drone of Russia laser pinpoints a Ukrainian target and stays in the air. An attack helicopter, which is very expensive and Russia doesn't have many of them, doesn't want to get close to the front. So they shoot their missiles 10 clicks behind the front, so in the safety of Russian lines, and then disengage and go back to the rear. The missiles are very precise if the drone laser points the target and the missiles hit. Ukrainians cannot do anything against it because you cannot shoot these missiles down and you cannot shoot the helicopter down because it's 10 kilometers away. Ukraine could shoot it down with F-16 because they have longer radars, and Ukrainian fighters could then engage from 50 kilometers away. But with Ukrainian MiG-29s and the capacity of the radars right now, if you bring them close to the front, they will be shot down. So there's nothing Ukraine can do against these alligators. Now we go to Bakhmut. North of Bakhmut, there is a very slow advancement. The main goal of Ukrainian forces here is to take Berkhivka and the western heights of these settlements. These heights are needed to bombard into Bakhmut even more precisely. What Ukraine is doing here daily now is bombarding into Bakhmut already with effect, destroying Russian equipment there. But the push to take Berkhivka is not very strong. It's more like a probing force, a positional battle. And this element right here, Dubova-Vesilivka, Ukrainians captured Russian positions west from Dubova-Vesilivka. They overrun some forest belts, but it's again, as I said, a positional battle. In the south of Bakhmut, same deal. Slow push to take Klishivka. Nothing big, but enough to tie in some localized reserves of the Russian army. What is this? It's a Russian Lancer drone, and it's a huge headache for the Ukrainians. Because this drone can be used as a recon drone and as a kamikaze drone. It's cheap to produce, it has a range of 40 kilometers and a big enough warhead to destroy an entire system with one hit. And this is what they're used for. Russia uses a lot of glide bombs. These are dumb plane bombs converted to be GPS guided, much like the West has. Russian have their own versions of them. If these bombs are released about 10 to 20 kilometers in the rear of the Russian lines and then they glide to Ukrainian positions, this activates a local Ukrainian air defense systems, activates their radars, which will be switched on, and then this Lancet drone finds these radars and air defense systems and hunts them. And it's a huge issue when 20 to 40,000 USD costing drone takes an air defense system which is irreplaceable. The Pentagon released a statement that they expect Ukrainian crews to end and complete their training of American Abrams tank in Germany by the end of summer. So they have 2.5 months. What capabilities does the Abrams give to this battle, to this war? Abrams is a very capable tank, but a very expensive one also. Abrams versus a Russian T-72, there is no question. Abrams will win that battle any day of the week. But unfortunately, if you put Abrams in a close quarters battle with Russian positions and they have one Kornet system, anti-armor system, this is enough to take out this tank. Abrams, as well as Leopard or Challenger, is not a wonder tank. It's not a wonder Waffe. It's just a better tank. But still, it can be destroyed with weapons that Russia has and possesses on mass scale, like the Kornet, like the regular RPG, if you pound it enough with it. Now, it is a great tank, and I'm glad Ukraine is receiving it. And it is also a political message that USA will be giving Ukraine their modern capabilities. It's a message to Russia. But unless these tanks arrive in big numbers, I mean hundreds, they don't have a big changing effect on the battlefield. I'm not minimizing the effects of this tank, I'm just being real here. And I'm very glad these tanks are being given to Ukraine. But since people I see, they seem to over-exaggerate the effect of Western tanks. They are just tanks like the Russian tanks, only a lot better. But they still can be and will be destroyed. If these tanks are used improperly, in convoys, for example, that is bunched together, the distances are not kept within the vehicles. For the ending of this topic, I still want to end it with, I am waiting eagerly for these tanks to be transferred for Ukraine, and I feel a relief that USA is finally doing this. Remember, I was talking with the Russian losses about the artillery systems. They lost 10 in the last 24 hours, and 5 of those you can see here. This picture gathers together about, 15 square kilometers of fields, and 5 of the Russian Msta-S were stationed here. An entire self-propelled howitzer unit, 155 millimeter, correct me if I'm wrong here. They were all destroyed with one single Ukrainian counter-artillery barrage, a very effective battle. Self-propelled howitzers are responsible for taking out these Western tanks. Taking out these saves the tanks and saves Ukrainian lives. So this is a beautiful photo right here. To end this video, I want to go back to the destructive effects of the flooding in the Kherson region. This is a Ukrainian drone delivering food and supply and water to the Russian-occupied Oleshki settlements. The Russians don't evacuate, they don't deliver food and water, they don't do any humanitarian work for the people living in the flooded areas. And Ukrainians have to do that over the enemy lines with the drones. Let's watch this video. Footage of Ukrainian vampire drone delivering humanitarian aid to Ukrainians on temporary occupied settlements. Going over the Dnieper River, we see the Oleshki, Salonsi, and we see people on the shores, and boom, it dropped. This is not a grenade as we're used to seeing. This is a humanitarian packet. Dropped it in the water, and now the people are going to swim for it. And this is a tented area. I mean, this is an area where Ukrainians are dropping the supplies for the people to share. And knowing Russia, they will bombard this area, unfortunately. There is food, canned food. Hopefully there is water. I want to just personally say this. Thank you to the armed forces of Ukraine for doing this. It would be very easy to say, oh, they're on the Russian occupied side. We're not going to do anything because we need everything for our people. Well, they are Ukrainian people. They're just only on the Russian occupied side. And this is, again, why Ukrainian army proves itself in my eyes that they care about the people, about the lives, delivering over the enemy lines, risking losing their drones to help the people. Thank you for doing this. My friends, if you want a cool shirt like mine, in HIMARS I trust, I'm sure you do also, check out estoniansoldier.com, my merch store, in the description below. Very cool designs there, made by you guys actually, you the viewers. Now it's time to thank the Patreons. I know you want to hear some freaky language, my freaky pronunciation of your names. I'll thank 5 new Patreons, tier 10 and above. Carelessly, Harry Abrams, Chris Mkullouk, Gillian Pader, Karl Bergenhem. Thank you to these 5 people for making my life easier. If you want compact news about this Russo-Ukrainian war 3 times a day, my Twitter account is perfect for it. Link is in the description below. Also, I suggest you go and follow my Instagram account. Keep up with my life. And as always, until my next video, Slava Ukraini!